Welcome to Fuel Up Classic, my brand new YouTube channel where I'll be showing you my classic car addiction. Now today's video was meant to be something fast, Italian and really rather exotic. However, on the way to the MOT station last week, I ended up buying another car. So I thought, let's show you a car that's none of those things. It is of course the Land Rover Discovery. So I thought before we take the car out on the road, I should probably make a little confession first. Now, I had no intention of buying another car, and especially not another old Land Rover. I've realised that this is Land Rover number 12 now that I've owned over probably a period of about 10 years. But it's my very first Discovery, which has kind of revealed quite a lot of exciting things about these cars and how I think that perhaps the Discovery is a little bit of a hidden gem in terms of the Land Rover lineup, and it might just offer an excellent way into classic 4x4 SUV ownership on a budget. But for quite some years it's been kind of the forgotten product of Land Rover, slightly unloved, you could say. It doesn't share the character of a Defender or the legacy of a Range Rover. I've had this car now for about 2 weeks. It was a complete purchase on a whim, and it took me all of 2 minutes to make the decision that yes, what I was doing was a brilliant idea. That remains to be seen. But I will document my ownership with this car. It's going to feature in the channel again as we go along. I'm sure things will crop up. I'll be doing a buying guide on the Discovery as well. But for now, I want to introduce you to the car, why I think the Discovery is a bit of a forgotten icon in terms of what it meant for Land Rover at the time, and why we should now start to see these Discoveries, especially the early models, as classic cars in their own right, and crucially, why they could offer a really sensible way into Land Rover ownership. So, 2 weeks, 500 miles. What have I learned about the car so far? Well, the first thing I should probably point out, as the internet is awash with Land Rover bashing, reliability, or they're forever breaking down, they'll cost you a fortune. So as I've hinted, I bought this car near enough unseen. I mean, I'd seen it from a distance. I had a quick look underneath it, and I took the garage owner's word that it was a good example. Now, I'm not saying you should do that. You should do your due diligence when you buy any car, let alone an old Land Rover or an old classic car for any make or model. But it survived the first test, and that was to drive me home just under an hour on a mixture of roads without a single problem whatsoever. And that was a really, really pleasant surprise, because as any classic car owner might know, the first drive when you pick up a new car, I find, is often the most tense. But this one came back absolutely fine. So in my mind, big tick for the first initial reliability. There seems to be no hidden horrors. It didn't surprise me. It performed exactly as it should. This particular model is the 300 TDI diesel. It's a first for me as well. I've never owned a car with a 300 TDI. I've had several 200 TDIs. I've had a P38 Range Rover diesel that used a BMW diesel engine. Never owned a 300. And my initial sort of feelings on the car and the engine combination are overwhelmingly positive as well. It's refined. No, it's not going to win any drag races. By modern standards, it develops 111 brake horsepower in a car that weighs quite a bit. So it is by modern standards, a slouch. However, get it up to speed on a road like this. We're doing 50 miles an hour now, and it's perfectly fine. It's got adequate power. I've taken it on a few long journeys, did a 100-mile hit along the motorway the other weekend in it, performed perfectly. It's got a radio that actually works and you can hear at speed. It's got electric windows, it's got electric mirrors, it's got a heating and an air conditioning system that works perfectly, central locking. And that might sound like, well, big deal, you know, they're just things you come to expect. But actually, if you're coming from a Defender or a really basic car from the early 90s, late 80s, 90s 4x4s, they didn't have a lot of that. These were luxury items. You were still getting the exact same interior in terms of dashboard, plastics, buttons, everything else in the Discovery at this era as you were in the Range Rover, which was a pinnacle of luxury. So actually, you have to look at it and go, the Discovery was a bit of a bargain then, and even more so, it's a bit of a bargain now. Well, it's worth noting that this one is actually a 7-seater. It's got the 2 little fold-down seats in the boot. Will I ever use them? No, but they're incredibly clever, and they fold up to the side of the boot, and I may never use them, but they're there if I need to, and they don't encroach on the boot space, hardly at all. So it's clever, clever packaging, and it's worth noting as well, this car, the interior of the Discovery, was designed by Sir Terence Conran. It achieved a design award. It's very, very clever in here, and it has a very different feel to other Land Rover products. If you get into a Range Rover Classic, or you get into a Defender, they have a feeling of being quite tight and quite cozy. But this feels light, it feels airy, there's storage spaces absolutely everywhere. You've got cubby boxes, you've got one on the glove box, you've got a space on top of the dashboard, you've got storage up here, storage on the doors. It feels huge in here. Now, this is a late example. This is a late 1997 build. So it's actually sort of encroaching into the last year of production for these. And you can see that from an early example, even the Discovery started to move more up market. It's got all those additional extras that I've mentioned, you know, electric windows and mirrors and twin sunroofs, which don't leak. That's a big thing on a Discovery. Look out for the sunroofs leaking, or if they've been taped shut, because most do, and most have been taped up, and they're a real pain to put right. Luckily on this one, they work exactly as they should, and I'm yet to find big puddles after rain, so hopefully watertight for the time being. It's been somewhat of a very, very pleasant surprise. I mean, I've talked about how I think it's more refined, and perhaps I'm stating the obvious there, but it really is. And you can see what they were doing when they developed this car. Land Rover in the late 80s was in a bit of trouble. They were not only in a bit of financial issues, they also had quite a limited product lineup. You could buy the the 90 and the 110, I should say. It later became the Defender, but for all intents and purposes, it's largely the same vehicle. And you had the Range Rover. But the 90 and the 110 at that time was still very, very much, and would continue to be for quite some years afterwards, a basic utilitarian workhorse. It was hard work to have one of those and use it every day. There were compromises. It wasn't built for that. And then you had the Range Rover. That had increasingly been developed. It was getting a little long in the tooth by the late 80s anyway, although once again it went on to be produced for a number of years afterwards. However, that had moved increasingly upmarket. So by the time this made its debut in 1989 at the Frankfurt Motor Show, the Range Rover was a luxury status symbol, and what Land Rover needed was something that fitted the middle ground. It slotted in the middle. It combined the utilitarian and the practicality workhorse nature of a 90 and a 110, but with a bit more creature comfort that people came to expect of a Range Rover. And that's exactly what they delivered. Because I own a Defender and I own a Range Rover Classic from a similar period, this slots, in my mind, perfectly down the middle. So they hit the design brief spot on in the first place. But I think what that's done, as time has gone by, it hasn't lent itself well to the Discovery. It's ended up being a bit of a forgotten classic. For years and years and years, they've been somewhat unloved. They've been worked to the ground. They've had their engines pulled out of them to put into Defenders, because Defenders have always been highly regarded. They've always been more valuable. So the Discovery was kind of just pushed to one side, run to the ground, scrapped when they were no good. If you want to own a Land Rover, or you want to own a classic SUV 4x4, they're at a good price point that you can pick one of these up from £1,500 with an MOT. Now, for that price point, please don't be surprised if you need to do some work on it. But a really, really exceptional example is probably not going to cost you any more than about £5,000. Now, if you compare that to a Land Rover Defender, well, you could pay 3-4 times that amount easily for one. And as I've said, that comes with a number of compromises. And the same with the Range Rover Classic. The prices of them have shot up. They are very much recognized as a classic, but they come with their issues. You used to see these early Discoveries on the road everywhere. They were family transport, they were workhorses, they were vans, they were farm vehicles. There's less and less of these left on the road, especially those in good condition. Now, no one can really speculate on what the market will do and what will go up and what won't go up. However, it is fair to say that as there are less and less examples of these on the road, good ones should become more sought after. So I think that it's got all the credentials for being a classic car, and I have to admit, I was in two minds of whether to feature this vehicle on the channel. I thought, really, who's going to be interested in an old Discovery that's done 178,000 miles and I didn't pay a lot of money for? But after living with it, I've been so impressed by it. I was like, actually, this car deserves to be highlighted. It deserves to have a place out there. There is not a huge amount of content on YouTube, on Instagram, wherever you want to get your content from, your classic car fix, or your Land Rover fix, I should say. There isn't a lot on these old Discoveries. And I think it, again, ties into that unloved nature of, well, it's just another old 4x4. But, as we've seen, it isn't just another old 4x4. It was a game changer for Land Rover. They're becoming rarer and rarer. Prices of them will, I hope, will creep up, or at least maintain, as long as you've got a good example. So it ticks all the boxes for sensible ownership. What don't I like about it? Well, I think it ties in slightly with what we said. It doesn't have an image. I don't know whether that bothers me so much, because as a tool, it's a fantastic vehicle. I've discovered that quite early on. As a practical, rugged vehicle, it ticks all the boxes. However, I'm so used to driving the Defender and the Range Rover, where people come and talk to you at petrol stations. Other Defender drivers wave at you. You share a bit of that ownership experience. With the Discovery, that doesn't really exist, I don't think. But, as I said, as time goes on, that might change, and they may start to deserve their recognition. and it is a little soft and wallowy, that you get an awful lot of body roll. It's quite a tall vehicle. You've got this stepped roof, which is synonymous with Discovery design, that creates this airy cabin, but is also a very high center of gravity. It's softly sprung. So if you, it sounds a little bit ridiculous, but if you expect this to be a fun car to hustle down a twisty road, I'm not sure why you would, but if you do, you will find it disappointing. It is a large, heavy, wallowy old car. In fact, in a lot of ways, it is remarkably similar to the Range Rover. Not too surprising. It shares the same chassis. It shares a number of its inner structure with the Range Rover. And this car was developed on a shoestring budget. It was, I mean, if you're a real car bore like I am, you can look around the cabin, even on this late 90s example, and I can spot quite a lot of parts bin specials from British Leyland on other cars. Most noticeably, the door handles. They're still from a Morris Marina, and we're going into the late 90s, early 2000s, and they're still using 70s British Leyland products in here. The rear lights, well, they're straight off an Austin Maestro van. So it is a little bit of a parts bin special, but it all works, it's all durable, it's all part of the charm, and it actually feels pretty well screwed together in here. I mean, it's lasted this number of years, and it's lasted nearly 180,000 miles, so it can't be all that bad, can it? So as I mentioned, I had to do a fair bit of man maths to justify buying this car, but I don't regret it. It had, on paper, all the recipes to go horribly wrong, but in this case, I have to say it was a gamble that's paid off, and I'm really, really glad I bought one. And in closing, what I hope the video's done is highlight to you a model of Land Rover that you might have previously overlooked and gone, well, why would you want one of those? What does a Discovery offer? It's not a Range Rover, it's not a Defender. And no, it isn't. And in a lot of ways, it's a good thing that it's neither of those things. It is a great compromise between the two. But let me know in the comments below whether you think I'm completely mad, or whether you think, actually, that's not a bad buy. I wouldn't mind one of those.